A most convincing UFO encounter. A man claims that he was abducted, tracked, and experimented on at Devil's Den State Park. This man who served in the U.S. Air Force, it's amazing how a lot of these abductees and whatever are service people. So this man who served in the U.S. Air Force has one of the most convincing UFO encounter stories. He had a terrifying experience at Devil's Den State Park, claiming to have been repeatedly abducted by extraterrestrial aliens, fitted with a tracking device and even experimented on, he says. Terry Lovelace found something strange in his leg during a doctor's visit in 2012. He felt a sharp pain, lost his balance, and fallen. As the doctor took an x-ray, he discovered a small square object deep inside Terry's leg. The doctor was confused because Terry had never had surgery or an accident that could explain this. And then Terry remembered something he had tried to forget about 40 years ago. A terrifying experience at Devil's Den State Park. The object in his leg was not man-made. In 1973, Mr. Lovelace joined the U.S. Air Force immediately after graduating from high school. He received training as a medic, EMT, and was stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, which was previously called Sedalia Air Force Base. The base served as a B-2 bomber base and missile base and was home to the 351st Strategic Missile Wing, with many Minuteman II nuclear-armed ICBM silos scattered across the rural area. Lovelace worked as a medic at an Air Force base and drove an ambulance at night with his partner Toby. One night in June 1977, while taking a break, they looked at the stars. Toby, who loved astronomy, pointed out planets and constellations. Their night shifts were usually quiet, but this night changed their lives forever. Later, Lovelace and Toby went camping at Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas. As they sat by the fire, the sounds of crickets and frogs suddenly stopped, making everything eerily silent. And then they saw three bright lights moving towards them. As the lights got closer, they realized they were coming from a huge black, triangular-shaped UFO. The blue laser beam quickly scanned over them, and the next thing they knew, they had lost consciousness. When Lovelace woke up, Toby was staring outside the tent. Lovelace looked too and saw the UFO floating above the ground of about 12 children standing in a field. Confused, he asked, "Why are those kids out there at this time of night?" And Toby responded, "They aren't kids. Don't you remember? They took us and hurt us." Hearing this triggered Lovelace's memory. Over the years, he used hypnosis to recover more details about what happened that night, and he remembered being taken inside the UFO, where strange-looking beings performed medical experiments on him, he said. These beings looked somewhat human, but they were also very different. They did not speak, but communicated using thoughts, telepathy. Lovelace recalled lying on an examination table, trying to scream, but no sound came out. Through telepathy, I guess it's almost like unable to move. Now, through telepathy, he could hear the beings telling him not to be afraid and that they would return him safely. Like sleep paralysis, I guess. Now, as the UFO hovered over them, Lovelace felt an overwhelming sense of calm, almost like he was sedated. A bright white light shone down from the craft for about 30 seconds, lighting up the whole campsite. Then a thin blue laser scanned the entire area, sweeping over them, their tent, and the fire. After a few minutes, everything went dark again. Toby casually said, "Show's over," and the two men went back to their tent and fell asleep, something that seems impossible given the situation. But they were still being affected by the ship's technology, which kept them calm and made them tired. Lovelace later woke up in a terrifying place. He was not in the tent anymore. He was unclothed, lying in a cold rubber floor with his clothes folded on his chest. The air smelled like chemicals, and a low humming sound filled the space. Panic set in when he realized he couldn't move. His body was paralyzed, but his mind was racing. He could only watch. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a woman screaming in terror. His eyes adjusted. He saw he was in an enormous room, much larger than the spacecraft above their camp should have been able to hold. To his right, at least 10 other people, men, women, even children, lay paralyzed like him, their eyes darting in fear of staring blankly at the ceiling. Small floating vehicles carried children around their space. Then he saw them. Small gray-skinned beings with large black eyes wearing gray filter suits. They moved quickly and mechanically, but what shocked him even more was that there were human beings among them, people wearing beige uniforms with orange insignias, seemingly part of the crew. They ignored the abductees and went about their tasks. Isn't that something? Then Lovelace locked eyes with a strange pink-skinned being that stood about 6 feet tall. Unlike the smaller greys, this one had an intense presence. As it stared at him, Lovelace felt it reading his mind, downloading his thoughts and memories. He felt completely exposed and violated. Before he could process what was happening, several gray beings lifted him and carried him down a hallway. This is really invasive, isn't it? This really sounds demonic to me. Now, along the way, he saw glass tanks lining the right side of the corridor. Some were empty, others contained strange creatures, some familiar, others completely alien. In one tank, he noticed pink water that looked like a newborn puppy, but when the tiny creature opened its eyes, Terry realized it was not a puppy, and he panicked. At the end of the hallway, the Greys took him into a dome-shaped medical examination room. The entire room was white, gray, or stainless steel, resembling a hospital. They placed him on a table. Oddly felt warm, but he realized it was not heated for his comfort. It was warm from the bodies that had been there before him. And then 2 new aliens appeared, 9-foot-tall beings resembling praying mantises. The smaller Greys turned Lovelace into his side, and the mantis-like beings began operating on his lower back. The pain was unbearable. He screamed, but no sound came out. One of the mantis aliens seemed annoyed and telepathically told him, "Why are you screaming? Stop screaming. You know we don't hurt you. You know we take you back." Then, with a tap on his forehead, everything went blank. Well, what do you mean? The man was being invaded, and he was hurting. He didn't want to be touched or anything. Now, moments later, Lovelace and Toby found themselves lying near their car. Terry was not scared at first. He was annoyed that they had not put him back in their tent. But then a group of 6 Greys appeared, dragging them across the grass and tossing them into the tent. Everything was still unnaturally silent. Terry wanted to speak, but was too exhausted, his vision blurred, and he passed out. He woke up again, blinded with 2 blinding flashes of green light piercing through the tent, making his body ache. Toby peeked through the tent flap, mumbling something. Lovelace's watch had stopped at midnight, but the tent's clock showed 3 a.m. 3 hours had passed, but they had no memory of what had happened during that time. And Terry Lovelace reached for his flashlight, but Toby stopped him, whispering for him to stay quiet. Okay, so what role did Toby play? Was he controlling Terry Lovelace? That's what it sounds like to me. Terry then noticed that Toby was crying. They heard footsteps and movement around the campsite, but they finally dared to look outside. They saw a huge craft hovering nearby. How many crafts and how many abductions were going on that same night? And they finally dared to look outside, the huge craft hovering. It had small windows, and Terry saw figures moving inside. Below the craft, they saw what looked like children walking around. Toby whispered that they were not human. Toby then started crying again, saying, "They took us, they hurt us." Suddenly memories hit Lovelace, bright lights, small creatures, a giant insect, medical instruments, terrible pain. He tried to push the images away. Then a white beam of light came from the craft, and the strange figures walked into it and disappeared. The ship then rose, rotated, silently flew away at high speed. Lovelace said that they had a terrible experience that left their skin red and sore like a bad sunburn all over their body, even the soles of their feet. They had to go to the hospital at the base for 2 days because they were very dehydrated. Back at the Air Force Base, Lovelace dropped Toby off and went home, where his wife saw his condition and took him to the medical clinic. He told the doctors about his burns, but left out what happened between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m., fearing they'd think he was crazy. The doctors confirmed that his burns were from radiation, and his clothes were taken away as biohazard material. Then, on the third night, the two men in black suits from the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, OSI, showed up at Terry's hospital room. They questioned him, acting as if they already knew what had happened. One of them read him his military rights, making it clear he was in serious trouble. They pressured him to tell them everything, but he only admitted to seeing lights. The men accused him of hiding the truth, then made him sign documents he was not allowed to read. They warned him never to speak of the incident, forbade him from ever contacting Toby again. Soon after, Toby was transferred to Japan, and they never spoke again. The whole experience traumatized Terry, so he kept quiet, trying to forget everything. Over time, the memories faded, though he continued to suffer from PTSD. Despite this, he built a successful career, became a lawyer, and led a seemingly normal life. Terry Lovelace was profoundly disturbed by his encounter and left with numerous unanswered questions. Subsequently, he authored a book called Incident at Devil's Den, a True Story, with the intention of uncovering the facts about extraterrestrial abductions and inspired others to share their experiences. In 2012, during a routine X-ray of his leg, the doctors found the strange object above his knee. It was about the size of a fingernail and had two wires attached. The radiologist thought it looked like a small tracking device. They also found a group of other foreign objects in his calf muscle. There were no scars, meaning there was no sign of surgery injury. The discovery made Lovelace remember the disturbing events from 1977 he'd never planned to talk about. And the most shocking part was, since there were no scars, the radiologist suggested Lovelace must have had this object in his leg since birth. And that's, of course, not possible. On his personal blog, Lovelace writes, September of 2017, I was a guest speaker on UFO event in Houston. It was my first public appearance and opportunity to speak candidly on the topic of alien abduction. This was the time when I decided to write a book. It's an important topic, and we deserve to be informed and not misled, he said. And this is on Hows and Whys by Vicky Verma. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.